SECfans.com. Week 7 had a weird one last week. It did go kind of as we expected, but maybe not as the nation or as you guys expected. We're going to get into some games this week and got some interesting stuff going on in terms of the segments that we're going to do outside of the games. But before we get into that, remember, please give us your scores in the comments. Let us know where we're wrong and back it up with some data so we can get back to you. So anyway, first game we're going to talk about this week is Alabama and Arkansas. This seems to be a game that used to be really tough for Alabama and recently has sort of changed in terms of who has the upper hand. So Alabama's coming off a game last week in Texas A&M that was a little bit bigger of a struggle than maybe the media thought and we thought. Based on what Nick Saban was saying going into that game, it wasn't a surprise to him that they put up such a fight. So let's talk a little bit about that game before we get into Arkansas. We're not going to talk a whole lot about this game, but we do want to talk about where Alabama is to this point and kind of where Arkansas is and see how they match up. So let's talk about Alabama A&M. What did you see and what did we learn?
Alabama and A&M kind of turned out the way we expected in that, we modeled this as a close game. Our model had this 37-30 Alabama over A&M. I had this 27-3. I thought it was going to be more lopsided than it was. To a certain extent, I don't know that it was all that far off, right? Because Alabama at one point in this game is up 24-3, and then they fumble the ball on a receiver screen where it looks like they're going to kind of put the game away in a long drive. A&M turns around, is able to score in an 8-play drive, backs Alabama up, gets a safety, and then has a late score, and that's how you ended up with a 27-19 final. This game was really on track to be kind of what we expected, and I say this just because we model these games to try to get an understanding of where things aren't going to quite, line up with expectations and predictions. We didn't think this game necessarily warranted the large point spread, and it wasn't because we felt like Alabama was some massively flawed team. The thing we flagged in week 6 was A&M's rush defense at 76% of opponent averages is averaging better than Alabama's, meaning A&M holds teams to only 76% of whatever they would hold against their other opponents that they've played. Alabama's opponents, they've averaged 85% of their season averages against Alabama. A lot of that is due to the fact that Alabama's opponents only averaged 3.3 yards per carry going into the Texas A&M game. It's hard to distinguish yourself. Alabama distinguishes himself greatly by only allowing 1.7 yard per carry against A&M. That was actually hugely impressive against a team that averaged 5.6 yards per carry going into that game. But what A&M showed is if you're an elite run defense, you can give Alabama a lot of problems. Now, what I think Alabama showed is when they played a team like this that could stop the run this well last year, they gave up, they would score 10 points. They wouldn't score 27. And, I think this game kind of showed where Alabama's grown and that they were able to generate some plays passing, even though the run game wasn't working. They were able to generate some big run plays, have a little bit of consistency and a little more fluidity of offense. But I think overall, the main point I had was that Texas A&M is a greatly underrated team. I think they're a very good team that everyone took way too much from, an early season blowout sort of game that became an ugly loss against UCLA. Everybody focuses on the mental collapse, but the truth is we don't really care about wins or losses in that respect from a projection. It tells you a lot about a team mentally, but what we saw was a team that was up big against UCLA early. That showed what they were capable of. It showed what the offense and the defense was capable of. Everybody's kind of disregarded the fact that they got that huge lead. Since that game, they've had some sputters, particularly first half against Louisiana Lafayette. But once they came back in that game and really turned it on, they've been great. And, I think that's what these two teams are. And I think Alabama came out, played a tough game in an extremely hostile road environment, and did what they needed to do in order to get a win.
Yeah, I thought looking at the game, it's an uncomfortable game, and Alabama fans probably aren't used to that to this point in the season. Been blowing everybody out, but a couple of things stood out to me. One, it's 24-3, and A&M gets a short field, and then we're talking about a team that can go for that has the, I say luxury, but they're behind. So they have the luxury as an offense to be able to go for it on fourth down. They know they're going for it every fourth down. So that completely changes and opens up what they can do as an offense and puts a lot more undue pressure on the defense. So not only that, but they had both of their touchdowns were ridiculous circus plays. Now, credit to Amon for making them happen, but all of these things had to happen for it to be still an 8-point win for Alabama. So I think, like you, they're reading too much into it. And I think, like Nick Saban said going into this week, this is the best team we played up to this point. And look, don't expect all these blowouts. And that's why he got so mad about with the rat poison comments and all that, is he doesn't want the Alabama fan or the media and their expectations of 59-3, 66-0 every week to wear off on his players. And he does it every year. It happens every season. He talks to his players, to the media, and this one's no different. So we can maybe discuss a little more about what we saw in Alabama in this game, but I want to talk a little bit about Arkansas and give them their due. Like some of the other teams this season, we haven't had a chance to talk about them as much as we'd want. So tell me what you think about Arkansas, maybe not just in this South Carolina game last weekend where it didn't go their way, but sort of in general. Is this the same kind of Arkansas team we've seen in the past that's maybe stubbed their toe a little bit, or are the dynamics of this team better or worse than we've seen in recent years under Bielema?
This Arkansas team has some of the same strengths and weaknesses, but really they're suffering from personnel losses in some areas, and they're beginning to compensate with strengths in others. So last year, Arkansas really had issues with the offensive line, but they had a very good receiving core. They had what we both pegged from the very onset of the year to be the surprising breakout player in the SEC in Austin Allen. And based off those two sets, they were able to generate a lot of offense, put at some shootouts, and they were able to win some games. And it may not have been pretty, it may not have been what you wanted to see at times, but Arkansas was a decent enough football team with that style of offense, and they were able to sort of make things work. The problem is this year they don't have the receivers. When Cornelius went down, and they've already lost guys like Morgan and Hatcher and Reed, it really kind of gutted them. And you can't lose the top 6 players in your team in receptions and expect to have the same sort of passing game. And that's not good when you have a team that already struggles to run the ball last year. And while they seem to have shored up the run a little bit, and they still don't, frankly, they don't run the ball particularly well. I mean, Arkansas is decent enough, but against teams that mattered, like South Carolina, they only have 3.31 yards per carry. So they'd still have to rely on the passing game a little bit, and they just don't have the weapons to do it. And that's, I think, kind of been the struggle. And Allen, I think, has been frustrated. I do think the offensive line is probably a little better in pass pro. He's not getting banged around quite as much. But on the other hand, they haven't played as many opponents. The flip side to all this is last year, they were having to hit an extremely high bar to score, right? Because the defense was the real issue here. And if they were on a better defense, they would have probably been a very good offensive unit. They still have a bit of the same problem. Arkansas is giving up theoretically only 4.42 yards per carry, but they're doing it to teams that don't run the ball very well. And they're giving up passing, again, 6.5 yards per attempt, but again, to teams that don't throw the ball particularly well. Most of their opponents are meeting or exceeding opponent averages. So what you end up with a team that struggles a lot, but it just can't do what they need to do.
But not terrible, right? I mean,
they're not a terrible defense, and the run defense leaves a lot to be desired. The pass defense has been serviceable enough. It's not that bad, and whatever the numbers are going to be, and we'll get into the model in a minute, they're not as bad as, say, Florida's run defense. They're really not any worse than Florida or LSU defensively. As surprising as that may be to some people, I think that's kind of honestly a little bit of an indication of where the SEC is this year. They're still a lot better defensively than Ole Miss. They're probably better defensively than Mississippi State. They're just not quite good enough to hold up against the cream of the crop SEC teams, and they struggle a little too much against the run, and it's probably going to give them issues when they play the better opponents. But given the state of the SEC, it's not a bad mark, and it's probably good enough to be successful.
All right, and the next question I'm going to ask you, because we've talked about in the past this season where Arkansas is struggling, but they've got always got a puncher's chance because they've got a really good, we might even say on the right team, the best quarterback in the SEC. Allen goes down in this game with an injury. Bielema has come out and said he confirmed that it was pulled because of a shoulder injury. Hasn't said if he's going to be good to go this weekend. So where does that leave Arkansas if he's not good to go? Are they completely done for in this game, or are there some things they can do to kind of stop the bleeding and at least show up a little bit?
Well, I do think it certainly makes a really significant impact. As we said, we both felt like Austin Allen was a key piece of the offense, and really, there were a lot of times last year where he sort of invented things, took hits or and delivered a ball while falling down, or he would find a check down when you didn't think it would exist. He manufactured plays where I think if you had an average quarterback on that team at times, they would have just collapsed offensively. So much of that offense was Austin Allen. This game, though, he struggled. I mean, he only had 3.5 yards per attempt. He had a lot of issues. Cole Kelley was a lot more successful coming in with 8 of 13 passing, but that's also kind of tough because when you look at it, Cole Kelley came in late in the game, right? It's 41-10 when he steps in. There's only 12 minutes and 50 seconds left in the fourth quarter. South Carolina is already starting to rotate players at that point, up 5 touchdowns, and they get a backup quarterback in, and he kind of took some risks. They did some different things to make plays, and he threw some big passes, but he also threw a pick six. So for every the 2 touchdown passes he threw, he did throw one interception that got put back the other way. And again, he did it late, and the last couple drives there, he's doing it in the last 5 minutes of the game, in a game that they're way far behind. So South Carolina is in a prevent mode defense. I think losing Austin Allen can't be a good thing, and it helps a little bit that this game is maybe not one where the pressure is going to be on him so much to perform, and it helps that maybe he's a little bit mobile, that he can deal with some things, but it's a struggle, and I can't, it's not a good thing for a guy to be making his first career start playing against Alabama in Bryant Denny Stadium.
And if we're going to give Arkansas fans a little bit of hope in this game and maybe educate some Alabama fans who don't know much about South Carolina, I think it's fair to say, and I'll give you an opportunity to tell me that I'm crazy, I think it's fair to say that South Carolina is actually a really good defense. Not elite, not even good plus, but right there in the middle, a really good top 25%, top four, I don't know, maybe top half in the SEC. So is that fair to say that Arkansas wasn't facing a trash defense in South Carolina? So there is some positives to take away from this. Like if you're looking at Kelley, 10.8 yards per attempt.
Yeah, I certainly think so. And to sort of put it in perspective, South Carolina had allowed 5.2 yards per play against Texas A&M the week prior. Gave up 4.8 yards per play to Arkansas, not all that much less. And I think there's signs that a pretty good defense. They held people pretty well, and I mean that's a good sign, and you can take a lot from that. But on the other hand, South Carolina gave up 5.9 to Louisiana Tech. They gave up more yards to Kentucky than Arkansas, 4.8 to 4.78. Over 6 yards per play to Missouri, over 5 yards per play to North Carolina State, who probably is a pretty good team now. I'm not sure where they were that first week. But, all in all, I think maybe South Carolina is top in the conference, but to be honest, I don't know that they necessarily are a top half defense. And certainly in terms of yard per play statistics, they're right at sixth. So they're just squeaking in the upper half. I don't know. I mean, that score 48-22, it's rough, and anytime your defense gives up 48 points, which they did to South Carolina, who I think more importantly South Carolina is not an elite offense, then it sets the bar unattainably high. And Arkansas's whole issue is not that they only scored 22 points because it's a decent number. It's that they had to score 49 to win. And that's what makes things so unattainable. And that's really, it's those defensive struggles that frame everything. And everything in college football is relative to yourself and to your opponent. And their offense right now and their quote unquote struggles is all totally relevant or relative to the strength of their defense.
Since we don't have, I guess, a lot more to say about this without kind of crushing Arkansas and just handing it to Alabama, let's see what the numbers say. We've got a computer model in this game, so let's talk about the model. Tell me what it says, and tell me if there's anything kind of peculiar about it, or if it's just right down the middle what you expected.
Right. So the model in this game has Alabama winning 46-10. And it has that because Alabama's rush defense 70% of opponent averages, Arkansas 112% of opponent averages. We could probably stop there, honestly, because Alabama is a run first team. And the reason we said that A&M game was close, the reason we predicted to be close, I predicted a 27-3 game. It was because Texas A&M had the ability to stop the run and force Alabama out of their normal game plan. Arkansas doesn't really have that. And when you get in the pass defense, Alabama's still pretty darn good at 80% of opponent averages. Arkansas is 98% of opponent averages. So it really is kind of a defensive issue. Everything else, offensively, Arkansas is not bad. 4.4 yards per carry, 6.6 yards per attempt. About probably the same in the passing game, not quite as good in the run game. But because of the defensive averages, because Arkansas is worse on average than what most opponents are used to. People do better against Arkansas in the run than they usually did going into that game. It has Alabama with over 7 yards of carry, and Alabama with 7.4 yards per attempt to Arkansas's 4.6. And if Alabama gets 7.4 yards per carry, they can pretty much just run the ball whenever they want to do it, and they're going to be able to sustain drives running the ball, and that's hard to stop. And 4.6 yards per play, that's great, but and it's something we'll have to sort of touch on. That's with Allen, but it's not enough to sustain drives consistently, and that's where it comes up with the idea that Arkansas may score 10 points rather, get a couple points touchdowns on the board, but Alabama is going to be able to run the ball whenever they want to all day long, and that allows them to get 46 points. And this, it's just too high of a bar. I mean, however we want to talk about Arkansas and their offense and their issues with all the lost receivers and the injury to Cornelius, the fact that the run game is actually a lot better, 4.4 yards per carry, may not sound like a lot, but I mean, let's kind of put it in perspective, right? I mean, they're averaging, let's see here, 4.54 against all opponents this year, split stat. 4.35 exactly against FBS teams. Last year against FBS teams, it was only 3.72 yards per carry. I mean, they've improved quite a bit in the run game, and maybe they've taken a step back in the passing game, but it's it's just such a high bar when your defense is projected to give up 46 points. Gave up 48 to South Carolina last week, so it's a completely reasonable projection. It's just really hard to be able to overcome that.
And I think those numbers sort of are in line with what I was feeling about this game. I will say that those numbers are based on Allen playing most of this season. If he plays, I could see them scoring a few more points, maybe 16. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you my with and without Allen scores, and I'd love for you to do the same. With Allen, I'm going to go 44-16. Without Allen, I'm going to go 52-6. So let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. I think with Allen, this is probably something like I think it's more like a 55-17 game, honestly. And without him, I think it's going to be more like 49-3. And it's kind of odd. I think they would score more with Allen in the game because there'd be more pressure on their offense. They're going to remember last year where they jumped out to a huge lead off a bunch of turnovers. And then Arkansas slowly crept back and they had to keep scoring and they had to keep momentum. But I have a feeling a first-time starter, unless he just proves to be a savant, it's going to struggle in this environment. And this pass defense is very good. It's a very hostile road crowd. It's a hostile stadium. It's going to be tough. And if they try to press, this game with Kelley could get really out of hand due to turnovers. But I don't think they do that. Keep a little more close to the vest. And if Alabama knows that you can't score, then they're just going to kind of turtle and take the lead, run with it.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting point, and maybe we'll wind it down with this. But when you're allowing 112% of opponent pass and 98% of opponent run, I'm not sure that the 112% and the 98% they've given up have been against players that are better than, say, Tua at quarterback and the 17 five-star tailbacks that Alabama has after their starters. Is that fair to say?
No, that's also actually probably a really interesting point, that Alabama's issue to this point in the season blowing out teams has been they can't stop scoring, because when they have their four-string tailback, it's a five-star, number one in the country, top five, Najee Harris. That's their fourth-string running back. And when they were at Vanderbilt, they went six deep at running back, and the sixth guy was a four-star player, a four-star senior in Ronnie Clark, and they literally could not stop scoring. So there's a lot of teams probably that don't have the talent Alabama has and their backups, and Alabama needs to get reps for Tua. They have three, depending on the service, they have three true freshman receivers that were all rated 5 stars, and they have a 5-star quarterback, and they have a 5-star running back. And it's hard for them to stop scoring. So, one of the issues we said, turtle, I say that because they can do it at home. They can put in a walk-on because they have the full roster, and they haven't had the advantage of that on the road. But, it is an interesting problem. They put up a ton of points just because the backup score so much.
All right. And if we've still got any Arkansas fans left who haven't run to Twitter to tell us how big of idiots we are, tell me something that if you're Arkansas as a team, tell me a place in this game where you think there's a positive that they can come away with. If they just ignore the score, but there's something that they see on the field that they can take to the next game, what might it be?
Well, the obvious thing is if Kelley plays, it's going to be Kelley as a passer. That Kelley has an opportunity to show that he's a good player. He outplayed Allen in a per play sense. In unusual circumstance, I get that, last week. But you're able to pass in Alabama. Mond, as a true freshman, did it last week to a fair amount of success. And Kelley maybe can prove that. And if they want to succeed for the rest of the season, they're going to need to have a passing game. I think the other thing that Arkansas can probably do is, we already talked about the fact that I think the rush defense is poor. And I think it's going to be telling if they can slow down Alabama with a run, and try to make this a game. But I'm almost more interested to see if they can slow down Alabama's passing attack, because the real truth is Alabama will just win the game straight up if they can run every play, but they'd also like to be able to pass it a little bit too. And if they can pass, if they can do that, then you've got issues, because not only could you not stop Alabama running the ball, which nobody's going to fault you, most teams can't, but Alabama's average passing attack, if they're successful, that's a bad sign going forward. But I think Arkansas's pass defense is good enough to give Alabama issues. And if they can sort of limit Alabama passing the ball, especially once Alabama gets ahead, they're going to try to work on things. That's a positive moving forward. That says something that, okay, well, we can now sort of scheme with opponents because we can handle ourselves in the passing game. And they're right on the cusp of being a serviceable pass defense. So I think that's something they can take away as a possible positive.
That's pretty much it on Alabama, Arkansas. I think we've covered it pretty well. It's a little frustrating because this game, like I said, has had some interest in the past, where it may not this year, especially if Allen isn't good to go.